Hi, this is Austin Wintory, and I'm very gratefully here for another quarantine edition of the Game Maker's Notebook. Today, I had the absolute joy of talking with Jesse Harlin, a longtime friend and composer who worked for many years as a staff composer at LucasArts and participated in all manner of adventures there, and then has since been freelance since they vanished off the face of the earth, and has been writing music for projects like Mafia 3 and most recently Riot's big explosion into the world of competitive shooters, VALORANT. We talk at crazy length about his history, his formative years, adventures with LucasArts, Star Wars ad nauseum, etc., etc. It was a blast. Jesse is so much fun and has just so many little pearls of wisdom. So I hope you enjoy. I certainly did.
Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Well, hello. I am joined by the spectacular... Don't laugh at my... What an incredibly horrible start we're off to. The spectacular, I say unapologetically, Jesse Harlin. Now, before I let you say one word, I am going to say that I am sitting here. Well, so here's the funny thing. Actually, I take it back. I will let you say a word. Hello, Jesse. How are you doing?
Hello.
That is in no way answering my question. So
sorry, I wanted to give you one word.
How
I'm fine. I'm not fine. The world's not fine. I'm hanging in there. I think is probably the best answer right now.
That's a sentiment that probably almost everybody listening, whenever the case. I don't actually know when this one is going to be published. It might be weeks or months from now, and by any luck, the world will be in a better place. And even if incrementally than when we're recording, because it's a dark time.
Yeah,
right.
It better not be in a worse place. That's all I'm hoping.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just hold off on publishing this until then, so that we can be like a voice of it. You have it better than we did.
No, you should publish it sooner rather than later, in case there's no internet connection for anybody.
That's true.
Down the road.
Yeah, it's just like on the cusp of the apocalypse.
Right. Yeah.
Well, in that case, we'll get right into it. So there's two things that were burning in my mind to say up front, because you are one of those figures in our expanded game audio community that has you have a unique role in that. A couple years ago, actually not even, I think last summer, I did a panel with a handful of our friends and colleagues I think it was a kind of an offshoot of E3, and it was sort of, like the soundtracks of your games panel 101, whatever. It was kind of a general audience thing where we talked about game music from a super high level, very general, non-technical kind of perspective. Mm-hmm. And so the first question, inevitably, how did you get started in games? And I think there were 5 of us on the panel, and Gareth Coker was on the panel, and he was the only one whose story didn't begin with how somehow you were at the onset of their career. Because it was literally Panka, Gordy Hab, and Will Roger, all of whom attribute the beginnings of their career to you. And then my own, which is, probably more than you realize, is that when I was in school in the USC program that you also went to, the sort of media music education graduate program, I remember during my first ever GDC, essentially sneaking away from school for a week and coming up to San Francisco and running into, like at the airport, Brian King, who was the head of the program. And we realized we kind of caught each other playing hooky. And so there was like this mutual understanding of, like, well, I won't tell if you won't tell. And he goes, I'm actually going to go visit a former student at his new job, newish. And let me see if you can come. I don't even know if you remember this.
I absolutely remember it.
Well, I never like to assume, because I was like, I knew nothing. I was such a little like bright-eyed idiot. But being able to go, so to this day, I'm sitting here drinking coffee, literally right now, from a Java the Hutt coffee mug that was bought in the like employee secret gift shop at LucasArts. Right. So as backstory, Jesse was a star alumni of the program because he graduated USC and then goes and gets like a job as a staff composer at one of the epicenters of creativity, I would argue. Certainly for me as a diehard obsessor with the LucasArts games of the 90s, the Tim Schafer, Ron Gilbert, Clint Bajakian, Peter McConnell, like that legacy, that's what I grew up on.
Right.
And so to me, whatever the current incarnation of that at the time was, it's like the Holy Land for me. So being able to go and visit you while still a student and get my little, I got a coffee mug on the tour of Lucasfilm and LucasArts and ILM, courtesy of Jesse Harlin. That was a formative, holy shit, this career is possible and full of amazing people kind of moment. So I throw my own hat in that ring of people to whom I felt a debt of gratitude. So with all of that as the backdrop, because you really are a lot of people's, you're like in certain ways, you're like the Shirley Walker, where there's a lot of composer. For people that aren't familiar, Shirley Walker was this composer that is sort of responsible in a non-trivial way for contributing to the ultimate long-term success of like Hans Zimmer and Danny Elfman and innumerable others. And I see you in a similar route, like very accomplished, but also very enabling of colleagues.
That's a measure. I don't know if I could I don't know if anyone could say a nicer compliment. I really
just facts, man. I'm really not trying to kind of, I don't think I'm saying anything inaccurate or like complimentary or meant to flatter. It's just true. It was a funny moment because I don't even know. I mean, probably Will and Gordy knew that about each other, but I don't know that we all broadly knew we had you so kind of meaningfully in common when we were at that panel and everybody, because the joke was Gareth, we're all look at him and we're like, just get out of here. Like this is basically a Jesse panel now.
Well, just give him my number and
Yeah, that's true. His career needs a shot in the arm. And I figure you could be the nice source of that. It's true, man. It's just, you're a well-loved guy in this community and have been for a long time.
That's really nice to hear. Our career is a weird one. Being a composer is a weird job. And it's a very isolating job. And so, your career fluctuates, and there's moments where you feel like you're being really successful. And then there's moments where you feel like you're, forgotten about. Yeah. I'm 43, which is not very old at all. But when I go to GDC, I'm starting to feel like an old guy.
Right.
Sure. And, if just based on nothing more than I physically get more exhausted from just walking around Moscone Center for 3 solid days, and I can't pull 4 all-nighters in a row like I used to do.
I think there's multiple variables. If I may be the science nerd, I think that there's at play there also the fact of the more kind of successful and busy one gets, the more time they spend in their chair and the more their muscles are atrophying in general.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like, it's simultaneously maybe an aging thing and just kind of this side channel metric of increased productivity.
Yeah.
That's my super positive idealistic spin on it's not my fault I'm in horrible shape. I like
it. I'll take it
all the time.
But yeah,
well, go ahead.
I was gonna say that, like, in those moments where you're doing really well, I think I've never really talked to another composer about it, so I'll ask you. Like, there's moments when I'm doing well in my career where I feel like, like, I have these moments of feeling as if, maybe I'll end up being like a John Williams kind of guy down the line, where I'll have worked for, 60 years in the industry and be successful, and people will know my name, and I'll have made a mark on the industry, and not that I'm like in it for fame, but like, you write and you throw yourself into all these projects, and you want people to at least hear your stuff, and you want to,
yeah, of course,
if people enjoy it, you want them to know that you're the one that wrote it, so that they, you like knowing that people enjoy your stuff. But then there's other times where your things are maybe not going well in your career, or not even that they're not going well, but maybe you just have a down stretch where you don't have any work for like 6 months at a time, and those moments can always be tough because you don't know if that period of time is going to end.
Yeah. Well, there's no guarantees. It's not like, I know this is rough, but at least every 6 months, that reliable thing always comes back and puts food on the table. Like, there's just this, it's always an unknown. The horizon is permanently a question mark.
Right. I'm before I went freelance, I never understood how incredibly appropriate the feast and famine analogy is, because it's not about, oh, I'm kind of busy, and oh, I don't have much going on. It's feast is always, I have so much that I can't possibly handle it all myself. I don't know what I'm going to do. It is overwhelming. And famine is, there's nothing, and is this going to be the end of me? And so anyway, when you get into those famine periods of time, and now you're not thinking, boy, I hope one day I'll be a John Williams or a Jerry Goldsmith sort of composer figure in the industry, then you just start hoping, like, oh, well, maybe if I'm lucky, I'll end up being like a Bruce Broughton kind of figure who does a lot of work, but maybe nobody outside of the film world really knows his name and knows what he does, but he does work and is able to have a long, happy career.
Well, and Bruce is a specifically interesting one because he's within the industry very revered.
Yeah.
And so he's got this very kind of asymmetric profile where, other than like, kids plus or minus approximately our age who grew up on like Rescuers Down Under or Harry and the Hendersons or something, other than a few of those, or even like the young Sherlock Holmes, of the early 80s, he's one of those that is almost entirely unknown to the kind of broader public, in contrast to a Williams or a Zimmer or an Elfman.
Right.
But internally to like our world, you'd be hard pressed to find people that are held up in a higher degree. The one that for me keeps me up at night, because I've been through exactly what you're describing, and that, when things are great, your brain sometimes will fantasize about how high can this go? What's the best way this can play out? And one of them that torments me are the composers that had those and then it faded and then it never ever came back. And the one I always think of for some reason, there's two. Bill Conti is a guy. This guy he's an Oscar winning he won the Oscar for The Right Stuff in I think 84. And like, he wrote one of the most iconic scores of all time, fucking Rocky films.
Right.
And
yeah.
I love that you go to that one. I love there's three.
I'm from Philly, so
well, there you go.
Yeah,
to the choir on that one.
Yeah.
So here you have a composer who is like, he made a legitimate mark on culture with that. But he couldn't, and it's not like he's dead. He's probably, if someone came to him and said, we'd like for you to do the next Avengers film or something, I assume, I don't know, obviously I don't only met him a time or two. I don't know him personally, really, but I would assume he'd jump at the chance. But he's one of those people that it seems like is just not really working anymore. Yeah. And you think, how can that be? You know, because at one point in time, there wasn't a bigger name in the world than Bill Conti. Mm-hmm. And that's the one that I always think, like, as soon as something comes out and goes well, I think, is this like the dividing line? And from here forward, I become like the later Bill Conti, you know? And that's the one that, you know, in my more vulnerable, darker moments, I work, because, you know, things can seem really great, and it's like this portent of it crashing to come still. Yeah.
So, you know, if I could be known as a Shirley Walker kind of figure, I am extraordinarily happy with that. I will take that.
Well, in many respects, I would argue you've actually surpassed Shirley, with all due respect to her legacy, which is like, will forever be attached. For those unaware, Shirley Walker is the first woman to ever score a major Hollywood actual studio film, which was Memoirs of an Invisible Man, starring the amazing Billy Zane. But she was a no joke composer, most famously, of course, for the Batman animated series that she was the
just amazing
composer. And score like Batman Mask of the Phantasm is just, it's just an objectively fucking great piece of music.
Right.
And not to mention that she also mentored a number of composers that are still quite busy and active today, especially in animation, because of that, you know, just the TV grind. She had to have a little bit of a team, and all those folks are still thriving. So yeah, like, but her solo composing career outside of those, like the kind of the most famous thing she would have been known for was the first 3 or so of the Final Destination movies, which are kind of culty, you know, that's like it's not, those aren't Oscar movies, you know, which is not meant to be judgments of them. It's just, it could easily be an indictment of the Academy for not taking them seriously. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is, she is perhaps best remembered as somebody who was, while a great composer, also extremely generous in her facilitation and fostering of other people's careers. Yeah. You really have achieved a lot, though, as a composer and the fostering and facilitating parts. That's why, in a way, you've kind of surpassed her, because your career is one to be reckoned with, completely independent of how many people feel like they owe you theirs, which is pretty amazing. So,
yeah, you know what feels really nice right now is not all the accolades, because it's very nice of you to say those, but what feels really nice about this conversation right now is knowing that this morning I was mentoring a young composer who reached out to me by way of Facebook, and she was asking me, you know, like, I just graduated, I'm looking to get into the industry. Is there any chance we could chat about what you think next steps should be for me? And I spent, I don't know, hour and a half, 2 hours just giving her advice. And
very you of you.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have a reputation for helping people.
Well, you know, it's one of those that a lot of good comes from it, in calculable and incalculable ways, I would argue. But why don't we, just because I always like to do a little bit of almost like housekeeping in a way, just the general before LucasArts.
Yeah.
You know, just give me kind of the snapshot of growing up. You said Philly. Where did the composing side of music, did you start as a musician that then realized I like writing? Were you composing right out of the gate? And then when did it become something that was serious enough to go after a place like USC to you know, to study it as a pathway to professional work?
Sure. So my parents were both very encouraging of the arts. My mom loves the arts, but feels as if she can't do it, but likes to facilitate it in other people. So when I was little, she signed me up for dance classes, and she signed me up for.
Please, God, tell me that video of Jesse dance recitals and stuff exists.
So, all right, I'm going to pause the "this is your life" part of it to let you know that, and some people know this, some people don't. But where'd you grow up, Austin?
Denver.
Okay. So there is I don't know if they're so prevalent in the West as they are in the East, but there's a lot of amusement parks back east.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was 21, I think, 21, I was going to school in England for my undergrad, and I came back to the States. I had a summer to do who knows what with. And I needed to get a job, and a friend of mine was working at Dorney Park in just outside Allentown, Pennsylvania. And he said that they might need a musician, and I'm a singer by training in terms of my instrument. And long story short, I got a job for a summer as a singer and dancer, doing the main stage show at the center stage at Dorney Park, where I was performing hits of the 60s and 70s while wearing white vinyl bell bottoms and a skin tight stretched turquoise sequin shirt.
Well, please, the love of God, tell me that video exists. I don't care about the recitals anymore.
Nope. It doesn't exist.
All right. Well, the next question:
there is photographic evidence of it, but not video.
Well, okay. So then, what would it take for a revival? I will book a stage.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. I have. It's funny because being a singer, I am used to being in performances, and I did a lot of theater when I was in my teens and when I was a kid, and musical theater, and played in bands and lots of bands once I got to like college. But one thing I've never had a head for is memorization of lyrics. And my problem is that I frequently get the verses scrambled up in my head, and I'll just sing the wrong verse at like, verse 2 will replace verse 1 and that sort of thing.
That's especially funny to think about in a musical theater context where like
it's
narrative, there's actually supposed to be like a plot unfolding.
Yeah, exactly. So I can remember when I was performing at Dorney Park, and I went out on stage and I forgot the lyrics to I Feel Good by James Brown. And for whatever reason,
lyrics too.
What's that?
And they're pretty complicated. Like,
well, I started singing the second verse instead of the first verse, and afterwards I got called back into the like performance manager's office, and he was like, "Look, you cannot just make up words when you're out there. You've got to. These are songs, and they've got lyrics, and you've got to do them." And I was like, "No. I didn't make them up. I did verse 2," and it was this like weird situation where I'm being criticized for not doing the song by someone who doesn't know the song enough to know that I was doing a different part of the song. He only knew the like whatever it was 20 bars or whatever that we quoted in this mashup of different songs. So good times. We used to, when in between shows, we set up an Atari 2600 backstage, and so we'd go out and we'd perform on the main stage, do the whole big crazy thing. I'd do the Running Man, all kinds of stuff, and then we'd come backstage and have Cubert tournaments between all of the dancers and singers and myself.
All right, well, you're painting a very evocative picture then of kind of where the different threads are starting to come together.
Yeah, well, yeah. So my dad was a drummer and a guitar player when he was in his teens, and he was the kind of kid who grew his hair long, but because of the Beatles, but wasn't allowed to wear it long because his parents were very 1950s and didn't like the Beatles, so he had to comb his hair back so that it looked like he had like a more like a greaser pompadour kind of thing, and then as soon as he left the house, he'd comb it all back down in front of his face like the Beatles. And so he was big into music, and when I was 11, he just decided one day, hey kids, it's time for you guys to learn an instrument. It's going to be good for you. So he took my brother and I to the local music store, a place called Medley Music, which I'm bummed doesn't exist anymore. And he said, all right, go ahead, pick out an instrument, and you guys, that's what you guys will learn. And so I walked around the store and I checked things out, and I came back to him and I was like, all right, I got it. I want to learn the trumpet. And he said, no, trumpet's stupid. You're going to learn keyboard. So I learned the keyboard. My brother,
you want, but not that, but not
that. Yeah. So I learned the keyboard, and my keyboard had a built-in sequencer module. So before MIDI, really, before I mean, MIDI existed, but before I understood what MIDI was, and before I worked with any sort of DAWs, my very first music writing was me sitting there recording things into this sequencer that all the data got stored on a floppy disk, like a 3.5-inch floppy disk drive in the keyboard itself, and that's how I started with music.
Did you start experimenting with composing straight out of the gate, or was there this period of like trying to learn, songs or classical repertoire or something like that?
Very, very briefly. I loved classical music, but I was a terrible piano player because I had absolutely no patience for learning how to become a piano player.
Right.
I only took a few lessons, and then I was like, this is lame. I want to play my own stuff. I don't want to play, the Happy Duck and whatever it is you start with.
Cross buns.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was. It's funny. We're very similar in that regard. My career as a concert pianist was about a 2-week window before I realized, if I change the notes, it's like a new piece, isn't it? And like very quickly started dabbling with, well, what if if we make all the flats into naturals, or what, like, just without knowing a thing about what I was doing from any kind of theoretical standpoint, it was just tinkering, and very quickly realizing you had departed from the original and going, I like that feeling.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was doing too. And in addition to that, then like we had a whole bunch of musical equipment, like, without getting into it too much, like my dad was a doctor and worked all the time, and very much got to a point where he was trying to live vicariously through his kids. So like, he had wanted to have a band and be a musician when he was a kid, but that didn't work out. So when he had kids, suddenly he would do these things where he'd like not be around a lot because he'd be working. And then one weekend he'd just be like, all right, we're going to the music store. Let's go get a bunch of stuff. And so we'd come home with microphones and mic stands and an 8-track and all this stuff. And so my brother and I had access to a whole lot of music gear, and we were like 12 and 13, and we're trying to start a band. And the first band I was in, I was playing keyboards. My brother was playing guitar. We had a singer who, I guess, hated the band. And so we called him one day and we were like, hey, are you coming over for practice? And his friend answered the phone. It was like, oh, yeah, no, Joe got hit by a bus. And then hung up the phone, and that was it. That's how we lost our singer for our band. So
there've been less classy exits from bands. So.
yeah, that's true. But what happened is one day I was like cleaning up the music room, we called it, down in our basement, and nobody was home, and I put on Aerosmith's Permanent Vacation on the CD player, and I'm singing along to it, and I didn't know it, but all the gear was on when I turned on the CD player. I happened to turn everything on, and the mixer desk and everything, and so the microphones were picking me up singing, even though I was just like straightening up cables and that sort of thing. So I'm down there and I'm singing along to this thing, and all of a sudden there's like this elephant herd stomping of footsteps, and it's my brother and my dad, and they come tearing ass down the stairs, and I'm like, what is that? Who's singing just now? And I'm like, what? And they said, we just heard this incredible singing right now. Who is that? Is that you? What are you listening to? I was like, oh, well, it's Aerosmith, but yeah, I was singing too. And they figured out that it was me. And so they're like, you're really good. And I mean, I was 13 and I didn't know anything, but the beginning of it was there. And so I started taking voice lessons, and that became my main instrument. And I sang for years, probably spent about 10 years studying voice and all through college, and playing in all kinds of different bands, punk bands and rock bands, prog rock bands, jazz bands, you name it, classical choirs, musical theater, all that stuff.
So knowing that you were a gamer in the backdrop of all that, at what point did those wires cross for you?
College. I went to college, and
prior to college, you weren't sort of fantasizing about scoring games, like it just was off your radar, despite playing games and being sort of a budding young composer.
I had the my mom is very fond of making mention of it now, that she hated video game music. I would play video games. This is the 1980s. Every household was lucky if they had 2 TVs. Most households had 1 TV. So right. I would take over the house TV to play Mega Man on the NES, and she just hated the music from it. And my dad hated the music from it. And they hated the fact that the music was short loops that would just play and play and play. And so, my mom now likes to say that she repeatedly would tell me, video games are a complete waste of your time. I don't know why you're so into them. You are not going to make a living doing this. You're wasting your time. I wish you would do something else with it. And so now I'm a, successful game composer.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Sure.
Yeah, exactly. But what happened is I was in college, and I was one of the kinds of people that when I went to college, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to, I had the college guide for, the student information guidebook. Again, it's 1994, so nothing's on the internet yet. So they had these physical printed guidebooks, and you could read through it and pick out what courses you wanted. And before I went to college, I sat down with the book and just circled everything. I was like, okay, first year I'll take these classes, second year I'll take these classes, etc., and mapped it all out. And then that's exactly what I did. I knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to study music and then film scoring. So when I was in college, I was scoring film stuff. I'd have film music assignments, and we'd be analyzing, how to read a scene and all that stuff. And then I'd come home and I'd write my film cues. And then I finally would have free time and I'd play video games. And I wasn't watching films, and I wasn't really loving film. I was loving video games. I remember when the first sequel to Myst came out, Riven. I just became obsessed with that game. to the point where I was blowing off lectures at school. If I did go to lectures, I was drawing pictures in my notes of puzzle solutions that might work for when I got home.
Yeah, that those games were especially like for the types with the predilection to kind of daydream. Those games were lethal because you couldn't really sit down and solve your way through a game like that. You had to sit there, have it stump you, and then ambiently in your head a week later it would suddenly hit you in this revelation of, oh shit, and that, which meant you had to stop what you were doing and rush and go test that solution. And it's like, I don't care if I'm in the middle of like my driver's test at the DMV, like I have to go. That's a rare game like that now.
I got totally into the world building of it. I deciphered their base 5 numbering system, and I would sit and just like, oh well, if base 5 is this, and this is how they start doing, you know, 10s and 20s, and like there was no need to do it, but I figured out what their numbering system probably was out to like 100 and etc. And I just was like obsessed about it. So it was this sort of a realization of that's the stuff I'm passionate about, and somebody's making music for these things, so I could be that someone. What I didn't know at the time, and it blows my mind 20 years later, was that at the time I'm thinking, I gotta get in there and do this. It had barely been done yet at the level that I wanted to do it at.
This was all contemporaneously quite fresh.
Right. Nobody had any idea at a collegiate level anything about it. And
I mean, they didn't even a few years later when I was there, it was still broadly unknown.
Yeah. And so, I didn't know at the time that nobody knew how to give me any answers. But I was just doggedly set on it. And I just felt like, well, there's got to be somebody out there. And if only I could just ask the right person. So I just asked everybody. And I got a reputation around the school as the guy who wants to do video game stuff. And I got a phone call from my teacher one day. And he said that he had just gotten a phone call from a local development studio that was scoring a game for the original PlayStation. And they'd done an EDM score for it, and Sony hated it. And they wanted to know if they had any students that would be interested in doing an orchestral score. And that was it.
What made them think to reach out? Had they just run out of money or something? What? It's surprising.
Maybe.
Sort of a bold move to be working on a Sony title and call a school and say, "Hey, any students interested in this gig?"
Yeah, I mean, I've never thought about that before, but you're absolutely right. That's ludicrous, but it paid off. It paid off for me anyway.
No, I mean, I owe my own career to student like talent scouting, but in my case, they were the talent was the developer that they found, and I just got to ride along with them.
Right.
So they, I assuming obviously then they called you and said, you're the one guy that seems to be interested in this stuff.
Two guys, me and one other dude, a guy named Paul Stroud, and we both scored the game together. And I have a feeling that when they said to us, we'd like both of you to score the game, that they maybe meant something different than how we understood it. We thought they probably meant you take these cues and you take these cues and split the score up and you guys score the game.
Right. Paul
and I knew so little about everything at that point that we were like, oh, we got to score together. All right, well, okay. I then lived at Paul's place for the next few months, and we would literally go like, all right, here, I wrote 16 bars of this cue, now it's your turn. And we would switch into the chair in front of the computer, and the next guy would write the next chunk of the same song, and then he'd be like, all right, I'm done, now you. And that's how we wrote the score for the first game I ever worked on.
That's so hard for me to imagine. Every time I've ever tried something like that, it's proven to be incredibly difficult.
It was amazing. Paul had a very different way of approaching orchestration and everything. In fact, it's funny because the very first time, I think Paul and I think we first tried to do it separately. And I can remember the very first piece of music that I wrote for the game. I played it for my brother. He and I shared an apartment. And I played it for my brother. I was like, what do you think? And he said, no, this sounds terrible. This sounds like Mega Man. And I listened back to it and I was like, oh, shit, it does. It totally sounds like Mega Man. Here it is, like 1998, December of 1998, and I'm writing something that sounds like it's 15 years old at that point.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, chiptunes and sort of retro throwback was very much not in vogue yet.
Yeah, no, it was we were just moving away from that. Nobody wanted to hear that. So I went over to hear what Paul was doing, and Paul's stuff was really interesting, and it was this super hip orchestration stuff, and
I assume you're doing all this with samples, right? Like,
yeah, everything was all samples based in hardware samplers.
Yeah, okay, that was going to be my next question, is because if this is 1998,
yep,
the library situation is not like it is today.
Nope, that's right.
That's amazing. Well, so then that gave you your first taste.
Yep.
Did you think at that point, this is me, this is what I want to do, or were you chasing film and TV kind of opportunities? Were you living in LA when this
Not
was
yet
happening? Okay.
No, I was living in Liverpool, England, where I was going to school, and then we graduated. It was the last year that I was there, and Paul and I are still working on the game, and I had nowhere to live. As soon as I was done as a student there, that's the end of my student visa, and I'm not really supposed to be working over there. So I moved in with Paul in this small town of Uxbridge outside of London. They were super kind to let me stay there, and Paul and I just continued the same process of like, okay, I've written 20 bars, now it's your turn. And I slept on a sleeping bag on Paul's floor for a couple months while we finished the game. And then I moved back to Pennsylvania for about a week, and then me and some friends packed up a U-Haul and drove across the country to Burbank. And I was in Burbank for 3 years.
And so does that mean that you got here, it was kind of like hell or high water, I'm going to go to LA, and then you applied to the USC program? Or?
No, so what happened is I spent about a year before I applied to USC.
Okay.
I spent a year just trying to make it as a composer, and I have all the same stupid stories that like everybody has when they're starting out a career in Los Angeles. I was an extra. And so like, if you go back and you watch the latter seasons of Beverly Hills 90210, you can see me wandering around in the background. I was a seat filler on somebody's talk show, and then meanwhile I'm trying to network with directors and other composers and getting advice from people like, don't ever network with other composers, kid, because another composer is never going to give you a job. And I'm like, okay, thank you, Mr. Composer, I will do. It's actually terrible advice, though.
Well, I was going to say, what I love is that given everything that I was saying at the beginning of this, that's so hilariously backward when it comes to you specifically. But yeah, I do. Everyone seems to have those do what you gotta to survive and day player kind of gigs.
Right.
That's funny. Well, now I was 90210.
Yeah.
So all right. So then 3 years in Burbank.
Right.
That at somewhere in the midst you go to USC.
I go to USC, but I also applied for a job at LucasArts, at GDC. And it came down to a point where my roommates were going to be everyone was like, we're going to lose our apartment. Our lease is up. We all have to figure out what's next for us. They were all actors. I was living in an apartment with five people, four of which were actors, and me trying to do music.
Very stable rent payment environment.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I can still remember that one of the ways that I knew that I had like made it in life was that when I got my gig at LucasArts, I bought myself a bed. And that was like, oh, look at this. Two things were amazing. I had a business card that I didn't have to get printed for myself that said composer on it. And I had a bed. Those were the like, I am on my way signposts.
Yeah. Well, it's those little victories, man.
Yeah.
So wait, you applied in the midst of USC or like in parallel to that, you're saying?
Yeah. So I applied to LucasArts and I applied to USC. And in the space of 2 days, I got a call one day from LucasArts and they were like, thanks, but no thanks. I'd actually gone up and interviewed with them, or a phone interview, and they really liked it and had gone really well.
Who was the kind of person spearheading that in those days?
Well, so what happened is this is around 2000 when Mike, Clint, and Pete had just left LucasArts.
Okay, yeah, that's essentially why I was asking is where this falls relative to the kind of dynasty of the three of them.
Yep. They had left.
Is that what led to the opening? Is that why there even was a position?
Exactly. Yeah. So they were looking for somebody experienced to come in and be the new Mike, Clint, and Pete, as if they're replaceable. And
no kidding.
I got pretty far in the process. Got down to like me and maybe the person who got it, maybe a couple other people. I don't know. But it was me and definitely down to like me and Mark Grisky, and Mark Grisky got the job. But they told me they really liked me and they just wish I had some more experience, but keep in touch with them and see how it goes. So I get off the phone with them, and it might have even been like hours later. It was very, very close. I get a call from USC. And I called USC. That's what it was. It was right after that because I was like, God damn, I need to know what's going on with my life. I don't know if I'm going to be like, do I leave this apartment? Do I move away from Los Angeles? Like, what is happening? So I got off the phone with LucasArts and mustered up the courage eventually, relatively soon after, to call USC. And I was like, look, I applied for this graduate program and I haven't heard anything and I'm really wanting to know. And the person on the other end of the phone, with absolutely like the perfect amount of disinterest in the fact that this is a life-changing phone call, their tone of voice is just like, whatever, you're my 17th dream I'm gonna crush or make today, whatever.
It's the in Monsters Inc. the like, hello.
Exactly. That's exactly. Yeah, it's Roz. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm watching you, Wazowski. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I call Roz, and Roz asked me one question. She says to me, "If you get in, are you gonna be able to pay for it?" And I said, yes, without any idea of how I would. I just said yes. And she said, all right, you're in. And that was it.
I can just hear in the background tearing up the application of the rejection letter. Like, he says he's good for the money.
Yeah. And so that was it. I said, thanks. And she hung up, and I was like, did that just happen? Like, am I really in this prestigious graduate program or not, or what? But like a week later, I got the welcome to USC packet in the mail, and I was like, okay, I guess it worked.
So I love how you traded, instead of earning however much per year, now I get to incur a massive amount of debt as the the alternative. Obviously, that turned out to be a super positive thing.
Yeah.
So then, one of the things about USC from my experience, and I imagine it held true then as well, is that they're very much grooming you for the life of the freelance composer. It's talking about that, going out, meeting filmmakers, I'm sure they today would talk about meeting game designers, all that kind of stuff. And very much crafting the composers to have this expectation for you live and die by whatever you did yesterday.
That's right.
So then obviously you at some point then reapply to USC. Was there to LucasArts? Was there a big window? Yeah. Or I shouldn't assume that you reapplied. Maybe they called you and said we were wrong.
No, it was a weird year because it was I'd been in school for about a month when 9/11 happened. So Brian King had to call us and be like, look, we're not having any school for a little bit. And eventually we all went back into the classroom. And I can remember being down at USC and standing on the top of the parking structure that was near the music school. The thing was full of cars and I had to park on the roof. And I remember standing on the rooftop and looking around Los Angeles and what's it called? There's that building that's right next to USC, that like temple.
Oh, the shrine.
The shrine. Yeah, that's what it is. So there's like minarets from that against the Los Angeles skyline, and there's no airplanes in the sky, and it's like weirdly quiet. And I just remember thinking, like, what am I doing? Like, the world, kind of like now, it's like the world is upside down and I have to go sit in a room and learn how to write comedy underscore for something. Like, what the hell is going on?
That was I think that was a universally experienced awkward transition.
Yeah,
it's a surreal thing, to then say, okay, now let's look at Carl Stalling. And
right, exactly. Yeah,
well, that's a unique one.
That's what we did. But like, much like when I was in undergrad, I just did the same thing. I just went in there and I was like, hey, I'm the guy who wants to do game music, and I'm here to learn everything I can about film scoring so that I can apply it to scoring video games. And in my class at USC, it was I forget how many there were of us, like 20 maybe.
Yeah, I think it's right.
But Gordy Hab and Bear McCreary and I were all in the same class.
I didn't realize you and Bear were classmates.
Yeah.
That means that now with you, I've got like the royal flush of because we got to make our way through the list that year, I guess,
totally.
For this show. We did have a chat with Bear, and Gordy's been on the list. So
nice.
I had no idea.
Bear was super into video games. I remember a CD that he burnt and gave me of Mega Man arrangements that he made. I think Mega Man seems to be a recurring theme here in our talk.
So, all right. So then, obviously, you're learning the craft, but with this specific agenda. So then at what point did you, because in those days, I would imagine freelance game composing was not much of a thing yet. It was because it was barely a thing when I was a student a few years later.
Right.
So
no, it wasn't. So what happened is I knew that I was going to go to GDC that year and hit up the job area. So I made demos and I made business cards, and then I went to GDC and made a fool of myself, basically, because I just went from table to table at the job fair and I asked the same stupid question, which never really seemed to get me anywhere, which was, hey, hi, how you doing? Do you guys, do you do all your music in-house or do you outsource? Nobody wanted to talk to me.
That's strange. I would think that that's a pretty savvy way to ask that.
Yeah, but I don't know. It didn't get me anywhere. And in fact, I will never forget the time during that day that I went to Blizzard's booth, and I have no idea who was manning the booth for them at the time, but I had been a console gamer my whole life. And I went up to Blizzard and I was like, "Hey, do you guys make games, or are you just a publisher?" And the look I got from them was like, "You piece of shit! How do you not know who we are?"
We're gonna tell everybody your name.
Yeah,
we'll humiliate you publicly.
Right. And so as soon as I saw that look from them, I just instantly knew, like, crap. Well, I won't be working for them, and wandered on my way. But what happened is I ran into the guys at LucasArts there, and I just stopped by the booth and asked if the audio folks were around, and they said no, but they're going to be here at like 2 or something. So I came back, and the head of the audio department was there, or head of the sound department was there. And I just said, "Hey, Jeff, you asked me to keep in touch. I just wanted to say, hey, say hi and keep in touch. I'm at USC right now doing graduate work, learning how to score films, and still want to make games. And if you guys ever need anything, let me know. I'd love to talk with you." And gave him my most recent demo. And then I graduated a couple months later and could not find any scoring work at all. And bills were starting to be due, and I was paying things on credit cards in order to just like eat a loaf of bread every 2 days. And
you'll find that you can parse that out in slices.
I should have thought about that.
Yeah. I wish I heard you back then. I might have been able to help out in kind of home ec sort of way.
Yeah, but I mean, it was like I was looking up. I remember looking up on the internet at one point leather tooling so that I could put additional holes in my belt, because I was like literally a starving musician.
Wow, that is what a sign.
Yeah, and I ended up. I'm glad that we got here, because this brings me back to the other amazing, like the story about the like. Can you pay for it? That kind of thing. The other lady on the phone that made an amazing, life-changing thing. So I just start blanketing the world with trying to find a job. And I went to Target, and I did an interview with the manager of Target because they needed someone to move boxes in like
Target asking if they
needed music. No,
or if it's all freelance.
Yeah. No. I interviewed for the guy who was like, I need people to show up at midnight and unload boxes from shipping trucks and stuff. And he just had this like very kind, pitying look on his face. And he said to me, "Look, you're so overqualified for this job, and I can't hire you because you're going to be miserable doing it." And I said to him, "Yeah, but I need groceries and rent, and I just don't have it." And he said to me, "I wish I could help you, but you're going to find something better somewhere else. And I don't want you to be stuck here." And I walked away from there super bummed out, because I just needed money, but it was definitely the right call on his part.
He's like the seminary school teacher in Rudy.
Yeah,
he's like there to help. He's like, you need to be at Notre Dame, kid.
That's right. Yeah. So I don't remember how, but somehow I ended up getting someone to tell me THQ was looking for testers. And so I sent an email to THQ and said, "Hi, I'm, I don't know, recent graduate from USC, and I have experience working on games already, and I'd be very interested in talking with someone about a QA job, etc." And this woman wrote back to me and said, "Absolutely. I'd be happy to talk to you. Can you call me Monday morning?" And I was like, "Yes, I can. You got it, lady." I don't remember her name now, but
sure, she loved you calling her lady then.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't call her lady, but I mean, it was all email too. I was like, "Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Looking forward to speaking to you." Blah. And I actually practiced calling her number over the weekend to make sure that
Put
it
on a
worked.
suit and comb your
No, not that much, but like I would call the number to make sure that I had the number correct. So there were a couple times over the weekend where I called and I would hear like, hello, you've reached so-and-so from THQ. I'm not available right now, but please leave a message, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, I just, every time I'd call it, it was reassuring. It was like, okay, I'm getting close to a gig in the game industry. This is good. And I called her at 8:57 Monday morning. And I still get the same voicemail. And I was like, shit, okay, you're being too crazy, Harlan. Just chill out a little. I wait until 9:01. I remember like forcing myself to wait that extra 1 minute. I call at 9:01. I get the same message. Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, fuck, okay, maybe they don't get in the office until 10. So I sit there and I wait and I wait and I call her number at 10 a.m. and I get the main switchboard voice system. And I'm like, what? What happened to hiring ladies' voicemail? And I hang up. I was like, I must have misdialed. So I call back. Same thing, main switch number. Call back, main switch number. Call back, main switch number. And I start like freaking out and thinking like, what the hell is going on? So then I just start like hammering on the 0 button when I call in. Like maybe it'll send me to a live person and I can talk to them. And eventually I hit something and it goes to someone. And I may have even gone like into a directory, you know, and they're like, if you know the party's number, and I pressed random buttons and they was like, okay, connecting you. Whoever answered the phone, I instantly just like laid out my life story on them, and it ended with, and I talked with so-and-so and she said to call her Monday morning and that I'd be able to talk to her about a job in QA. And he said, oh, she doesn't work here anymore. And so between like Thursday when she had talked to me and Monday morning she had gotten fired or quit, and I had lost my in with the industry, and I just was crushed at that moment. But I pleaded with the guy to put me in touch with anybody at the company who might be able to talk, that I might be able to talk to about getting a gig. And eventually they were like, all right, well, here's a number. You could talk to this person. I think they do our outsourcing, like, temp employee type stuff.
Very temp.
Yeah.
It's going to turn out, the twist is that guy is going to be the one who turns out never existed and was no one can prove that right. That number, that extension doesn't work, and no employee records of any kind.
He's been dead for 40 years.
Exactly.
Yeah. No. So anyway, I called them and I got a job as a temp employee tester, but it freaked me out, definitely trying to get the gig. And
was that then immediately adjacent to LucasArts?
Oh, right. LucasArts, right. Oh yeah. That old part of my career. So I spent, I think it was 8 months as a tester, and out of nowhere one day I get a phone call. So I'm a tester and I'm working on some games, and I worked on like a Scooby-Doo game for the GameCube, and I was on the QA team for Red Faction 2. Then I end up on the QA team for the BattleBots game, and the game is just awful. And the problem that I have with the game is that I've now gone from being a tester who is crunching on game after game and making lots of like, I don't have a life anymore because I'm working 15-hour days every day. I get put onto a game that's not doing overtime anymore, and now suddenly my income shrinks by like half, and I'm starting to freak out. I'm starting to think like, I'm going to have to find a different job because I can't sustain this on a non-overtime based QA position. And right when I'm freaking out about it, I get a random email from Jeff Clement, the sound department head at LucasArts, and he says, "Hey, we're actually looking for a second composer. Any interest in talking to us about it?" And the from that email to me being on staff was probably 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so that was what year did you join there?
2003.
2003. Because
April 3rd, 2003. I remember the day.
And what was that? That obviously, because that was the goal. Normally we wouldn't spend so much time on these kind of, I guess, biographical stories, but it's just so informative. It's just so telling of what it can be like, because so many composers have their version of these kinds of highs and lows that, they're not talking to mysteriously dead for 40 years,
right?
THQ people or whatever. But
in fact, the day I started at THQ, I got a phone call from another game developer. I'm like walking through orientation, and they called my cell phone, and I had applied. I don't know. I'd sent them a demo or something, and they called me. I wish I could remember who it was, but they called me and they said, like, "Hey, we're looking for a staff composer. Are you available?" And I'm literally in the middle of orientation at that moment. They're walking us through the QA pit, and they're explaining to us how to use the handprint scanner to get into the building. And I'm trying to talk quietly to them on the phone during this, and I remember saying to them, like, "Well, I'm actually in orientation at a new job right this second, but if you guys are interested in talking to me about a job being a composer, I'm way more interested in that. So if you like, I'd be happy to leave this and come down and interview with you guys if you're."
Oh my God.
And saying that freaked them out, I'm sure, because they were like, you know what? No, we're good, thanks. Why don't you just call us later? And then they would never return my call.
Oh my God. The movie version of that is where the camera then widens and we become aware that the orientation has stopped, and the guy is like standing there looming next to you, like, "Would you like to, shall we wait more, Mr. Harlin?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And oh man, that's too funny. I don't actually give a shit about this orientation I'm at right now. I will abandon these people.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's like being on a date and then like another date calling and being like, "I can bail out of this." Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
That's just so damn funny. Well, so let's dig into some of this time at LucasArts for a bit, because one of the you did such a wide variety of things there. I'm sure I don't even know 3/4 of it, but I will forever.
Professional Jawa.
What?
Yeah. I was the voice of the Jawas in at least 2 different games.
You utinied professionally?
Professionally. Well, my favorite part was that I was the Jawas in The Force Unleashed. And
there's even Jawas in that game.
There were in the DLC. And we had to I went into like, they had all the Jawa stuff from the films that they could use as well, and they used a bunch of it. But because you could do things to the Jawas that didn't fit contextually with the recordings they already had, they needed someone else to make new Jawa sounds. And so one of my favorite things I did at LucasArts was the session where I got to record a suite of electrocuted Jawa sounds.
Oh my God. Well, we're slowly building your one-man show repertoire through the course of this thing. I'm keeping notes on all the things I'm going to need to see.
Kowakian monkey lizards. I'm the voice of the Kowakian monkey lizards for Star Wars: The Old Republic.
So wait, does that mean that you were hired as a composer, but does that mean that they would just grab whoever's available for those kinds of things? Or was that actually baked into the job description?
No. That was just because
like general audio department kind of
job. General audio department thing. It wasn't really, it was considered more a sound effect than a like voice performance. Like I wasn't being hired as an actor. I was making sound effects.
Right, sure.
Yeah, so they'd get me in front of a mic and they'd say like, okay, now Salacious Crumb, the
Oh yeah.
monkey guy, so we need you to do a bunch of that, and I would just and that
Nice.
that's it.
Very
They would
well
just
done.
do that. So I did that a lot. I was the voice of Luke Skywalker. I was the voice of Luke Skywalker's strained exertions for a for a Game Boy game.
I can just picture you having an opportunity to meet Mark Hamill and coming up to him and being like, "Ugh," and he just looks at you.
Yeah.
He's like, I feel something very familiar in you, as a testament to your strained exertion, the caliber of your strained exertions.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Not a lot of folks can claim to be Luke Skywalker's strained exertion.
No, that's true.
So I guess, so here's then a very pointed, specific question then.
Yeah.
Obviously, LucasArts, the home of Star Wars video games,
Right.
that led to an opportunity to write bona fide real Star Wars music. And that was, you were the first person that I was aware of. I'm sure you can tell me who the actual first person to write non-John Williams, also like Joel McNeely Star Wars music in the video game world, because I remember for the longest time I played every Star Wars game that it was made. I mean, from the like Rogue Squadron ones to like the more sort of hardcore X-Wing and X-Wing versus TIE Fighter and it went on and on and on, all the Dark Forces, and the overwhelming majority obviously were using John Williams music, just re-edited and piped in there. And it was almost taboo, it seemed like, from the outside to try to go toe to toe with that and write original music, or maybe that was just something they weren't factoring or whatnot. And so yours was the first time I remember playing a game and going, this is not John Williams music. This is actual new Star Wars music that they've commissioned for this.
Well, there had been a number of other people that had.
So educate me then on what was the predecessor to, because I somehow either missed those games or didn't realize what was, where that happened.
Mike, Clint, and Pete, they had written an original. I don't know which of them wrote which thing. In fact, I just mentioned something to Clint and Pete. I tagged them in something on Facebook this morning, and they were like, "Thanks, that's cool," but Mike wrote that. So
yeah, I mean that's always what happens there.
Yeah. So I don't actually know who wrote it. But TIE Fighter had an original score. Maybe X-Wing versus TIE Fighter.
It just seemed like it. Yeah, no, fair point. I do actually. Now that you say that, you jogged the memory of some of the TIE Fighter.
Dark Forces. Mark Grisky wrote Starfighter and Jedi Starfighter scores. Jeremy Soule did the Knights of the Old Republic score.
Mark actually, now that you said that, might be my first memory of this is a score that is full blown sort of Star Wars, or an aspiration at Star Wars music that is not John Williams.
Yeah.
And also I guess the added thing I would say is it wasn't also just mindlessly trying to sound like John Williams and or just rearranging those themes in ways that technically it's new music, but it's not really. It actually was new music.
Yeah.
All right, so fair enough. So you're no one special in this lineage,
right?
What you're driving at.
Yeah, I mean, what they let me do, which I still don't know why, it was crazy that they let me do it, is do Star Wars music that was distinctly un-Star Wars. The audio lead on Republic Commando, David Collins, he had put together an audio design document for the game that, the game in general was described amongst the team as the non-Star Wars game. It wasn't going to be the swashbuckling space opera game. It was going to be boots on the ground in the muck, telling the tale of the clone troopers. Jedi weren't going to appear in the game anywhere, and that was a very radical thing.
Before there was Rogue One.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very radical kind of approach to a Star Wars game, and David had referenced in his design document a whole bunch of things, like the score for Event Horizon and
Oh, wow.
Goldsmith's score for Alien, and a number of things that were decidedly not space opera music. And he had actually written, there was a teaser trailer for Republic Commando, and David had actually written like taiko drum music for it. And it worked great. And so when I came onto the project, it was my first major thing that I was doing at LucasArts. It was my first main composition gig at LucasArts. I'd done a couple smaller things here and there. I was the music editor for all the cutscenes on Giacchino's Secret Weapons Over Normandy score. And I had been the music editor on a Mark Risky score for Gladius, and stuff like that. But Republic Commando was my first thing I was going to really write there. And because it was the game that was not going to be a Star Wars sounding game in many regards, there was initially zero Williams music in the game, and they didn't want me to reference any themes from the score, and it was supposed to be totally separate. And we happened to have an intern that year, the first intern that I worked with at LucasArts, a guy named Ben, I think. And Ben happened to have traveled to the outback in Australia to like immerse himself in a indigenous Aboriginal tribe and learn everything he could about didgeridoo.
Wow.
And I thought that was rad. So I asked him if I could sample him playing a bunch of didgeridoo stuff. And so I built action cues in Republic Commando around Ben's didgeridoo samples that I recorded from him. And other weird things like that. Like we would, David and I were trying to just be as creative as possible. And I remember there was a time where I got this. So one of the levels on Geonosis was supposed to be a church for the Geonosians. So we started thinking like, you know, what does a non-human church music sound like?
Non-Abrahamic.
Yeah. And so we went into the recording studio at LucasArts, and we connected the computer in the control room into a I don't know how you say it. I don't know if it's heel or Heil talk box, like a guitar talk box, in the live room, and pumped loops of buzzing bees into the tube, and then I was revocalizing bee sounds with vowels shapes in my mouth back into the microphone. And we did that with like whale calls and a bunch of other crazy shit, and none of it worked. Like it was a super interesting experiment, and none of it worked creatively. David ended up using some of that stuff as sound design elements, but it didn't work musically. But that was the like environment that I was in at that time, the headspace that I was given the freedom to just kind of do whatever. And so we were working on the game for a while, and eventually it got to the point where they had some focus testing, and focus testing came back and they said, all right, everybody, well, job well done. Here's our main feedback. It doesn't feel like a Star Wars game. And we don't mean that in a good way. And so we're like, oh shit. Okay, well, I forget who suggested it, but then the suggestion came down to, you know, what if you start sticking Williams music in the game? And we tried it, and it instantly sounded like a Star Wars game. And so then I started putting into the score that I was writing things like the Trade Federation March theme. And
did you have carte blanche to use that sort of like from a kind of copyright perspective? Were you okay to use anything that you guys wanted to use?
I think the answer is no, but we never asked. And so I only found out years later that they don't like having you do that. Like
They
Williams
don't like
is,
copyright infringement?
yeah, well, I mean, they don't like it gets to be a really weird relationship between Star Wars and its music and Star Wars and Lucas and Star Wars and LucasArts and all that stuff is
Right. It's not a
like
big happy family the way it might look necessarily, or a cohesive.
yeah, like I
Oh,
remember there was a thing where LucasArts as a company still had to license the use of Star Wars as a license from Lucasfilm.
wow.
Yeah.
You know, as a total non sequitur off of that, but semi related, I will never forget when the Android phone launched, like
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
competitor. And I remember seeing in the fine print in the first TV commercials that I saw for it,
Yeah.
it said Droid.
Yep.
Used by permission from Lucasfilm, and I had no idea that the word droid
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
literally a trademark or a copyright or whatever of freaking Lucas. I blew
Yep.
my mind. I thought,
Yeah.
and how crazy that they shelled out God knows how much because they wanted to brand their phone that way.
Yeah, I'm positive that they also thought, like, I don't know for a fact. This is all conjecture on my part, but I feel like they got way too far down the road
Yeah.
with the branding of everything being droid before someone was like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That's not actually a thing we can use.
That's even more hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that makes sense that technically there isn't a standing license
Yeah.
in place.
So like, and one of the things that they hate, or like Williams people, I shouldn't say hate, but one of the things Williams people, I was told later, would never allow is remixing his music. So like we were never allowed to ask for Pro Tools sessions of like
Right.
the orchestral sessions and whatnot, in a way that we could then remix his stuff. I did have Pro Tools sessions of his stuff from the prequels, but it was only so that I could bounce cues out in isolation.
Meaning just so that you weren't literally like using the commercial soundtrack album
yeah,
in order
yeah,
to get the music into the game.
right. Which is exactly what we did anytime there was original trilogy music in a game. We didn't have Pro Tools sessions or anything, or reel-to-reel tape or anything from that. It was just, you know, you want to go make a Star Wars game? Here's your music set, everybody. It turns out that it's just the soundtrack releases. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I would just, digitize it and edit it in Logic.
It's funny because I think there's just this assumption that, especially I remember when I was, 21 or whatever, walking into those hallways, it feels like it's all connected. It feels like, wow, the archive through that door must be all the original tape masters of like the London Symphony sessions. And behind that door is, all the actual lightsabers. And to some extent, that's true.
To some extent, it is true. But then to another extent, you've got like the closet behind our audio department coordinator's desk, where if you went in there, the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet had a bottle of tequila and some old plastic decorations from like a party from some long time ago, and a copy of the Shadows of the Empire soundtrack CD by Joel McNeely with a post-it note on it that says "Do not ever use this." So it was, it was,
it's an office like any other, I guess.
Yeah,
it just happens to be the office where they made Star Wars stuff.
Yes. So I don't know if I've told this story anywhere else. Maybe probably have. I don't know if I'm repeating myself. I'm getting old. But when we were working on the game version of Star Wars Episode 3, they let me go up to the ranch and watch a unfinished version of the film because I needed to see what was happening in terms of Williams' score. So the first time that I saw Ep F3 was actually with the temp score, which is pretty rad. And
It's insane. I didn't even know they had temp scores, because
yeah,
it's like I mean, it would make sense from an editorial perspective, I guess.
yeah.
But I mean, they're not focus testing a movie like that, I would think.
No. But it was, but it was a temp score. And so, I'm sure it comes as like no surprise that like the immolation scene from F3 was all temped with adagio for strings, that sort of thing.
Right, sure.
The drums at the very beginning of was like some production library cue or something. It was like very not Star Wars sounding in terms of how it was produced. And so I was very interested to see that when it came around, Williams had done drums that kept the same spirit as the temp score, but were very different sounding in terms of its production and everything, and how he wrote, of course, too. But anyway, so like there was never more clear to me a moment of Star Wars is an amazing thing to so many people. And when I was 1 year old, I wanted to I made my mom call me Luke for a year when I was a kid. Like, not one, but when I was a kid, I made my mom call me Luke for a year, and she was like actually afraid that I'd forgotten what my name was and stuff. So
it was all those strained exertion sounds you were making as a 1 year old that really.
And I used to listen to the Empire Strikes Back album over and over and over again when I was a kid. And it's like, people obsess about Star Wars, but at Lucasfilm, it's a job. Nothing drove that home to me more than when I went to see Ep3 at the ranch, and somewhere in the middle of the film, somebody had fucked up and accidentally taped over about 8 minutes of the film with Judge Judy.
Wow. You were watching like a VHS?
VHS, yeah.
That's so damn funny. What do you even do in a situation like that? Like, you obviously waited for 8 minutes to see if this was going to end.
I did. I watched the whole thing, and I just sat there like my mouth open, astonished, That's completely appreciating the moment, aware of this is like a humbling moment of, because I had walked in there like, oh my God, I get to sit here myself, nobody else. I'm in a conference room at the ranch watching episode 3 before it's finished. Oh my God, I get to hear Williams' score, and then Judge Judy's in the middle.
I love thinking about the person whose like job is presumably in the editorial department at Lucasfilm working on episode 3 that also thinks, I really, really need to see Judge Judy, but I don't have time right now to watch Judge Judy. I clearly have to wait till I'm off my Star Wars clock, and then I'm going to get in on that. Like the notion of taping it for later is even probably my favorite part of that whole story. That's just so damn funny. What did you say to that? Which scene was it? Do you remember what they taped over?
What scene of Judge Judy?
No, come on. What? Good Lord. I need to picture like what's the most like immolation scene, like the order.
No, it was somewhere in the middle. It was probably around Obi-Wan on Commando.
That's just so. I guess there's no bad answer to that. There's
right?
No episode 3 scene that is not just preposterously amazing.
To be replaced with Judge.
Oh my God. That's so good.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, the whole experience was incredible because, like, 1, Judge Judy, and 2, temp score, 3, the effects aren't finished yet. So anytime Yoda was on screen, he was. Like the voice was recorded, but Yoda was like very roughly composited in and always in a T pose, and there's no animation on him, and he would just drift through a scene, like float through from side to side, and so the whole thing was incredible.
Does that kind of thing amplify the magic for you, or does peeling back the curtain make it feel more like, because you said at the beginning it's someone's job, even if it's Star Wars. Was that the takeaway, or was it like, I'm part of the magic?
That event all made me feel like, and the magic is a corporation and everyone's doing their jobs, and it's awesome that we get there in the end and it feels magical to everybody, but wow, look at all the work that goes into this, and wow, look at how rough and unfinished a piece of art is before it's ready. And but there were other times where I could appreciate the magic of it all. I remember the first time I had just started work there, and I remember the first time they told me where I could find the Star Wars sound effect library on the network, and that was it. The whole rest of the day, all I did was just sit there and go through alien vocalizations and droid sound effects and explosion sounds and you name it. I was just
Ben Burt, that guy to me is every bit as important as John Williams.
Totally.
To Star Wars, just like the inventiveness of those sounds, and especially knowing the very analog way that they were made.
Yeah.
That would have been a day. I would have spent my day precisely the same way as you.
Yeah.
So then jumping slightly ahead then, because obviously if Republic Commando is sort of the anti-Star Wars,
right?
You obviously have written a ton of music for the Old Republic, which is way more in the vein of like, let's, kind of pay homage and expand on that horizon.
I still try and stretch it. And the dev team tries to stretch it too. I did a queue for the most recent expansion called Star Wars The Old Republic Onslaught, and they were making a like casino type planet, somewhat akin to what was in The Last Jedi, and they said to me, what we really wish we could have is synthwave. So I did my best to try and write a Star Wars version of synthwave.
I've not heard that one.
Yeah, it still uses orchestral instruments, but there's a chunk of it in the middle where I just full on have like a drum beat, like a pop kind of drum beat. And Gordy Hab actually orchestrated that cue, and Gordy has this thing that he orchestrated on it that we had tried on another thing for Star Wars 1313, and it hadn't worked as well on that one, but it works amazingly in this cue, where it sounds like a filter sweep, but it's entirely made using a series of different trombone mutes. It's really pretty hip.
Yeah, well, there's probably not much room for that in all the Battlefront score.
Right, yeah, exactly.
That found a nice home. What I love about that is that you obviously get in bed with all this Star Wars material while at LucasArts. LucasArts then goes away, but you've actually been able to sustain that diet, I guess, and that relationship.
I was lucky. I was lucky. It was a case where it didn't have to go that way, and I'm happy that it did. But what happened is the guy who was my boss at LucasArts, Dara O'Farrell, started his own company that was going to be like a turnkey audio solution company, and he asked me to be the music part of it, and he asked one of our sound designers, Tom Bible, to be the sound design side of it, and Dara was going to be the voice side of it. And Dara got really on the ball about maintaining that relationship with BioWare. And because the game was still in development, because we had basically we had done I guess they call it vanilla, done the vanilla launch version of the Old Republic, but then it needed to be upkept with material. after that, there was no guarantee that they were going to keep hiring the same people. We were out of a job. And it was really entirely due to Dara's doggedness that that relationship continued. And he's still doing the voice stuff for them. I'm still doing the music stuff for them. Tom has gone on to work on a whole bunch of different freelance stuff, but now he is taking an on-staff audio lead position.
How much music would you say, just out of curiosity, at this point for the Old Republic? How much have you yourself? Because there's got to be a ton in there by this point.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of composers who've worked on it, and I was originally the music supervisor, and I had written about an hour of cues, maybe, for the original game. The lead composer originally was Mark Grisky, and then there was Lenny Moore and Will Roget and Gordy, and then Pete McConnell I hired to lead the Cantina music stuff, and he hired Steve Kirk and Jared Emerson Johnson to work with him on that stuff. And since then, because of how that all went down with like everybody loses their job and now, you know, how's it all going to go? And the relationship changed and Dara became the sole outsourcing company that they were using for the audio. And so rather than staying as music supervisor, I became like Dara's company's music person. So I ended up shifting into more of the like main music guy. And I've hired a bunch of different people over the intervening years. I've been working on this game now for like 13 or 14 years.
It's astonishing it's still going, you know?
Yeah.
Because I remember when it launched, it was like the biggest budget game of all time or something absolutely crazy. It was huge.
Yeah. It was the first voiced MMO, which was like, I remember when they told us that they wanted to voice the MMO, we were like, you're out of your minds. This is going to, I mean, how do you even put that on someone's computer?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like a terabyte of sound files just for that.
So it's been a long time.
And still alive and still
alive, still going. We're trying to figure out how to do stuff next due to the coronavirus. I think I'm probably going to do sample stuff for the next set of music just because things need to get done and we just don't know what's happening.
Yeah, orchestra recordings have become quite a challenge in the current situation.
I'm hearing so many interesting solutions that people are doing.
It's true.
Like the guy I know who had to just do 3 weeks worth of recording where the orchestra recorded one person at a time and they layered it all together. Or the session I know about where they set up all of the chairs for the orchestra and brought in instrumentalists in, but kept them at social distances in the chairs that they would sit in, and then layered like 4 recordings in instead of one at a time. And so, you know, you just have different people sitting in different chairs, and the stereo image of everything stays the same, but
I've definitely heard about that happening as well. That, you know, it's like they'll set up the room for a 70-piece orchestra for a 40-piece orchestra,
right?
You know, so there's a lot of real estate being used for a lot fewer people, to try to sort of make it safe and make it palatable for folks,
right? And then people are trying to figure out like remote recording sync software that has the lowest latency and all that stuff.
So the one that appears to be just a non-starter is choirs. That appears to be the one where there was a specific choir in Washington State that decided to, right before lockdowns were full on, and it was kind of this people starting to opt out and voluntarily sort of not show up for things. Kind of right at the tipping point in maybe February, there was this one choir that has turned out to be a very useful case study for scientists and, you know, epidemiologists and stuff, because what happened was there were like 50 people or 60 people in the choir, and they've been able to ascertain that one person had it at the rehearsal. And then it was like, of 50 people, 47 came down with it. Because they said singing is a choir rehearsal is essentially the perfect storm of corona transmission, because you have a bunch of people who are using their voice in the most full-bodied way, which basically maximizes your projection of like particles in a closed environment, standing unnaturally close together. I mean, it was like everything that you could possibly, but it was an interesting study of like because they went back and they apparently were able to like they mapped out the room and exactly where everybody was standing and where the one guy who had it was, and they literally meticulously went through. It's like a scene from a movie like Outbreak or something, where they went back and actually really did this kind of almost forensic analysis in order to really learn about how it transmits and how it could have moved around the room. And it's astonishing. You know, I think actually, sadly, like maybe one of them died, or I think the vast majority were okay, but they almost all got it.
Right.
And so choirs are in this unique position where, you know, orchestra, I have a friend who's an orchestra contractor who plays trombone. And so he went and bought all these crazy, they kind of look like plastic versions of a welder's mask. They're basically like clear plastic faceplates that come down over your face, so that all these brass players can kind of have little shields around them, because they're breathing very heavily by comparison to string players and stuff. And so he's been investing in all these, where, you know, he's like, okay, if we track the brass separately from the strings, which they're already pretty used to doing as it is, and everybody's wearing these, the brass players can kind of protect themselves from each other. You know, he seems confident they can move forward. And it's crazy, this sort of stuff that we have to sort of figure out. It's you know,
if I were a New Zealand orchestra, I would be marketing myself immediately right now as like this was Dan Reynolds from Epic. This was his suggestion, and I think it's absolutely a brilliant idea that, you know, New Zealand, because of how they've got a handle on everything, if they wanted to become the new epicenter of orchestral scoring in the world, they are 100% sitting on the capability of doing it.
Yeah, no kidding. They've even got practical experience, you know. I mean, they've really like the New Zealand Symphony not only recorded the last couple Hobbit movies, but Stephen Barton used them for Titanfall.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, all the orchestra stuff. I think some of it was done in London. Like he needed one session with like 1,000 horns or something. And so I think they did that in London. But yeah, the majority of the orchestra stuff in Titanfall or Titanfall 2, it's one of the two.
Yeah.
That was all the New Zealand Symphony. And like major, like a week of sessions or something. Not a little pickup, like a full-blown thing. And they sound amazing.
Nice.
So yeah, that's a funny... Well, so, all right, so let's shift gears radically here, because it's already been like 100 hours. And I want to just keep going forever and ever, but let's shift gears, because you obviously, LucasArts all goes away. You are now freelance in a way that is perhaps unexpected, and you're facing that. Most people don't go that route, right? You know, well, actually, most people kind of stay in their lane. Like I talked on here with Danny Baranowski, who did the opposite after a very successful indie scoring, you know, Crypt of the Necro Dancer and all these big indie hits, and being kind of the kingpin in many regards of the freelance composer in that space. He actually took a staff job. There was one developer he loved working with so much, he decided to just, you know, put a ring on it, as it were, and officially and exclusively dedicate himself to them. Obviously, the closure of LucasArts didn't give you much say in that subject, but you had to throw yourself into a freelance after having been not used to that for, I guess, well over a decade, right? Or around the decade, give or take.
Yeah. It was exactly 10 years.
Right. April 3rd, 2013.
That's right. And LucasArts closed April 4th.
For real?
Yeah.
So it's like literally to the day.
Literally 10 years in one day.
And here I thought I was joking. I was just proud that I remembered the date you said.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I was super bummed when we found out everything was closing because I thought like, oh, I'm not going to actually cross the 10-year mark, but I did. They gave us
They kept it open just for you.
just enough days to, yeah.
So obviously you had to then shift gears wildly. So then one thing I just want to leap to, because I'm sure there's a lot that could be spoken to it, especially any composers that are listening to this, just that, you've already said so much that I think is so invaluable to just the life in the trenches kind of stories. But
can I say one more that I think is super important?
You don't need my permission for anything, sir.
Losing my job at LucasArts on my last day at LucasArts was literally the first day I was supposed to come back from paternity leave from the birth of my first son. So I lose my job with a newborn baby. I lose my health care. I lose my ability to make a living. I went through a very long period of depression, like years. And if you are a composer and like life knocks you down, it's going to happen, and you're going to still keep being able to work, and you're going to still be able to find gigs and people to work with and projects that can get you out of bed in the morning, and things can totally get better. It took a long time, but I'm okay now and have been for a little while, but that was a serious knock. And
yeah, I mean, talk about the worst combo of variables.
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to say, like, that's
if you don't mind my drilling into that just a little, I've
sure.
I've been through some hell myself. I didn't have that situation, but I went through a period where I also was really struggling with, actual clinical depression.
Yeah.
And something that was interesting in hindsight is interesting. At the time, it was terrifying, was that music actually didn't really offer me the sort of the safety or the escape, like emotionally speaking. It felt part of what drove the depression was that it became this vicious cycle where as the depression took hold more tightly, it became harder to write. It just became harder to be productive. And what that felt like was, it was like music was, it felt like music was this horse I'd had my whole life. And we were partners, and it's like your trusty steed. And it felt like suddenly this kindred spirit was trying to buck me off. Like it didn't recognize me anymore. And so music being difficult, that had always been my safe harbor, had always been the thing I can turn to if I lose someone in my life, or I have relationship problems, or I have, or I get fired from a job and it's just devastating. It was like I could still just sit down at the piano, or I could sit down with some whatever and create music. And it always made it feel like, life's okay. And when that stopped being the case, or it got harder, that exponentially drove it for me. And it took a long time to figure out how to kind of make the first move to write that. Do you relate to any of that? Was there any aspect of that for you?
Yeah. Although mostly, I mean, that definitely happened for a little while. But mostly what I went through, I shouldn't say mostly, but a big element of what I went through was feeling like I had gone through effectively a breakup with Star Wars, where it felt like I'd been dumped by Star Wars. Seeing Star Wars felt painful, and I saw it everywhere. And it had been this thing that had always been a part of my life. And now it was a thing that I wasn't allowed to be a part of anymore. And
right at the moment that it was becoming maximally culturally just
exactly
omnipresent.
Right. It was everywhere. And I was now on the outside. And And at the same time, like there was all these lessons that I learned of like, don't pledge yourself to a company, because a company will never like love you back. And you can throw yourself into your work because you are proud of it and whatnot. But it's one thing if like you're at a job. This happens all the time in the game industry. You're at a job, you're all crunching, so you never have time for a personal life. And so everybody at that studio becomes your circle of your life. Nobody knows what it's like to be killing yourself on a game like Connect Star Wars that's then going to come out and get absolutely slaughtered in reviews. Nobody knows what it's like to kill yourself to make that thing, except for all the other people killing themselves to make that thing. And it's a weird bond that you end up having, and all your friends end up being the people that you're working with. And so it's one thing if you then decide, you know what, I've had enough, I'm gonna go work for another company, and you step away from that, and all those people are still there and you've left it. It's a very different thing when the company shuts down, and now it's like blowing a dandelion. Everybody that you worked with and knew, everybody disperses throughout the industry to go find new jobs, and that means that some of them are going to still be hanging around, but the game industry is a very nomadic industry. And so a lot of my very close friends were suddenly in Seattle or Amsterdam or, Florida. Like, IT professionals got out of doing game stuff and were working for just like a random tech company. Everybody goes everywhere, and you're suddenly very alone and very isolated, and it's a hard thing to go through.
So then let's sort of just look at that straight on, because you're obviously now freelance. And some people that transition, it really it kicks their ass, because they've never had to demo for a job, or they've never had to work on a job knowing that in a month this thing's going to be over, so I better be also working to get the next one lined up before this one's even finished. So trying to figure out, how do I focus on this without feeling like I also have one foot out the door already? And there's a lot of these things that become very second nature if that's all you've ever known. Like someone like me, I've never had a staff job.
Right.
And then, but between you and Grant Kirkhope, who also, he is like 20 years or something at Rare.
Yeah.
Or at Rare. And then he was at, what was that? The place that had the horrible, the 38.
Studio 38.
Yeah. And so he had, had a couple of staff jobs, and then suddenly was throwing himself.
Interestingly, and this is how small the industry is. Interestingly, one of the main producers at Studio 38 is a guy named Rich Gallup, who also was on the BattleBots test team with me at THQ.
I was going to say, as soon as the LucasArts thing happened, were you calling them and saying, are there more testing?
They'd gone out of business.
Oh, tragic.
Yeah.
Well, so obviously, to anyone familiar with your work, it did not kick your ass sufficiently to drive you away, because not terribly long after that, it felt like to me, Mafia 3 comes out. And I remember I was so stoked, because it was like you had managed to land an extremely legit project as a freelance composer, and writing music that was so decidedly far from the thing that all the LucasArts stuff would have theoretically padded out your resume with.
Right.
And it's always exciting to see someone be given a chance to do something that's, that they prove to be fully capable of, and yet a casual kind of superficial glance at their prior work would have not made obvious.
Well, it was not at all like that for me. But that's because when I was at LucasArts, I can't even count how many original IP I worked on that never saw the light of day, that had nothing to do with Star Wars or Indiana Jones, that I wrote music for. And they were always radically stylistically different. And some of my favorite things that I wrote at LucasArts were on these projects that never materialized, and none of them ever were Williams sounding projects. So when I started doing
kind of
stuff,
validating, I guess, is to
yeah, yeah,
to ship one of those things.
yeah, it totally was. I mean, it never came out, but I was doing some, much like with Republic Commando, I was doing some really different sounding stuff on Star Wars 1313 as well. I was writing it as source music to be in the world, but I was actually writing Star Wars gangster rap. I had created this persona of a protocol droid that got like electrocuted, and it fried his circuits somewhat, and rather than being the polite C-3PO protocol droid, he ended up with this like crazy amount of swagger. And so I was writing gangster rap tracks in like half English, half Huttese, and then processing them with droid processing. And then all of that was going to only be attached to a speeder in the world. So while you're like platforming your way up on the rooftop of some place, suddenly you just hear like go flying past you,
like a non-player controlled speeder. In other words, like something that's just Good Lord.
but
like in hindsight, I didn't need to write 45-minute long album.
No, I loved it because I can't just license music from the world with like,
of course,
for Star Wars to do that, I had to come up with other stuff. And so I was having a lot of fun with that stuff. I wrote a cue for 1313 where I experimented with running the low string section of the London Symphony Orchestra through like distortion pedals. Like they weren't actually in the room, it was all virtual distortion stuff, but I was experimenting with it. And let me be the one to let everyone know it's a dumb idea. It just sounds like a guitar tuned down to like F or something.
Yeah.
It's just stupid, so don't bother doing it. But I experimented with it. I got to see what it was like.
Yeah, it's always a shame. There's so many things I've tried along those ways, and especially with guitar amps and guitar pedals. They really do just make everything sound like even like I work with this cellist Tina Guo who plays electric cello.
Yeah,
and it's amazing how many things that she's played where people go, "Oh, who played the electric guitar on that?"
Yeah,
we worked so hard to make something that we thought was sort of cool and unique that you could only do on a cello.
Right.
But yeah, oh well.
Yeah,
great equalizer.
Yep, it just sounds like guitar pedals just make it sound like guitar.
Nonetheless, so well, you had good use for that though on Mafia 3.
Yeah, that's true. I had a blast doing Mafia 3 with Jim Bonney. And I got to do things. Yeah, you're right. I got to do things that were very Star Wars, which was fun. Like we hired step dancers to record body percussion.
I didn't even know about that.
Oh no! Oh yeah. It was awesome. So
I just think of it as a score that's just rife with this beautiful, like nasty kind of Southern blues kind of vibe where it's all these bass, like baritone guitar and dobro and harmonica and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And on top of that, so there's two halves to the score for Mafia 3. There's the in-game combat and exploration stuff, and then there's the score for the cinematics. And Jim wrote all the stuff for the in-game music, and I wrote all the cinematic stuff. and together we talked and figured out what the palette of the game would be. I'd been working with THQ for a while before Jim came on the project, so I'd figured out, like I had originally done 4 different demos for the game, and said to them, here's the 4 options I think you can take the score in. You can do an orchestral score like Mafia 1 and 2. You can do it's set in 1968, I think. So you could do a rock score. Like, what would it sound like if Led Zeppelin or the Moody Blues scored the game? You could do a blues score, or you could do like a blaxploitation funk score, because that very much, the storyline was very much in keeping with like a blaxploitation kind of story.
Right.
And the creative director said, we're absolutely not doing a blaxploitation score. He had been having the same conversation with other people on the team. There were some people that really wanted to go that way and other people that really didn't. And so he was like, we're just not going that way. So that's options out. And the audio lead didn't want to do the rock score because he was concerned that a big wall of guitars was going to eat up all the frequency range and just not allow you to be able to hear player feedback sounds like your clip is empty in your gun, or there's footsteps approaching and all that sort of stuff.
Sure, right.
So for frequency reasons only.
It's not a bad thought, actually, because that can be an incredibly overwhelming sound if properly mixed, because it's a big, wide color.
Totally. And then orchestral seemed like a boring option. Like, sure, we could do orchestral. Everybody can do orchestral. Everything has already been orchestral for this franchise. So we'll call that plan B. But why don't we explore this blues idea and see how it goes? And so I did a bunch of demos, and I don't know, I probably wrote about 10 minutes of music for the game before everybody finally was like, all right, I think this is the way to go. But I think it was probably not until we started mixing, like the score was all recorded, and we started mixing, and that's when I think it finally felt like, all right, this is going to work. Let's, we didn't make a mistake. This is going to be a good score.
Well, I certainly would second that as the oblivious consumer, just assuming everything was on track and decided and divined from the beginning.
Well, like using body percussion was a ton of fun to do. And I had to, like, we recorded in Nashville for 2 weeks. The first week was all of Jim's stuff, and the second week was all my stuff. And so I had to call Alan Umstead, the Nashville contractor, and I had to say, like, hey, Alan, can you find me dancers? And he had never had anyone ask him that before. And
it's been nonstop ever since, though.
Yeah, he's like, I get right, yeah. But he's like, I mean, I'll see what I can do. And not only did he find me, I think they were from Tennessee State. He found me 3 guys who were drum majors and also members of their fraternity's stepping team. And so they had
handed down from heaven.
Yeah, they had musicality. They had the attitude that you need for stepping, but they also, because they were drum majors, they could read music.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so we didn't even think at the time that we were going to have that kind of luck. We just thought, okay, well, we're not even going to bother printing out scores for the steppers because they're just dancers, most likely. And they showed up at the date and were drum majors. And so...
Wait, you didn't know that till they showed up?
Right. We had the parts written, but not printed.
What were you planning on doing?
I was going to just explain rhythms to them and play my temp track for them of samples that I had, and then get them to.
That was going to be my next question. How did you mock this up?
Samples. I mean, there's people that make little boutique libraries of body percussion, And so I just mocked it up with that stuff.
Got it. I see.
But then let's see. So then but then we found out that like they were having a hard time doing it that way of just listen and then perform it or have me explain what it is. And so at one point, I don't know, 15 minutes into the session or something, we're like, we've got these parts. Would it be helpful for you guys to just look at the sheet music for it? And they're like, well, give it a try. So I knelt in front of them as they performed it with the score on an iPad because nothing was printed. And I would just like scroll through pages of score with my finger on an iPad while they performed the pieces reading it off of the score. And it worked perfectly that way.
Is there a video of this?
There might be. Oh no, I know for a fact there is. Matt Bauer, the audio lead, he recorded everything from those sessions on a series of GoPros so that we'd have video footage of everything.
Oh man, I wish those dancers were wearing the GoPros, and so we have like dancer cam behind the scenes.
And it was really cool because the engineer that we used, a really talented guy named Ronan Chris Murphy, who is like Guar's recording engineer and King Crimson's recording engineer. He didn't know how to track, like how to mic step dancers. Do you want contact mics on the floor? Do you want ambient mics in the room? Like, do you close mic their feet? If you do that, are they going to accidentally kick the mic? Do you need 2 sets of mics, close mics, in case they do kick one, you still have a recording from another one? So what he ended up doing is just setting microphones up at like 2-foot intervals between the floor and the ceiling of the studio, just to capture every possibility.
1,000 channel recording for
and then figured out which of those ended up being the best one. I can't remember what it was, but it was like a mixture of a couple. But that was his approach, and it worked really well.
Was that part of the initial, like, because that's not really a blues thing?
No.
So where did that even figure in?
Well, I mean, stepping comes out of a historically African and African American tradition, and Lincoln Clay, who's the protagonist, is a black guy who comes back from Vietnam and has to deal with the just systemic racism of the South, and so I had originally thought about maybe using some gospel music, and I was looking for ways to get a signature sound to the score that reflected Lincoln and Lincoln's family and Lincoln's backstory, and at some point I just kind of focused in on stepping and thought that would be a really cool texture in the music, and it worked really well.
Was there any kind of uphill battle in selling anybody on that? Like, did people get it immediately, or
no? It was an uphill battle. And like, even when we were mixing, we got to the point where at one point, I had somebody from the dev team who was like, "Hey, that's really loud in the score." And I was like, "That's because it's a signature instrument that, like, that's how loud it needs to be in the score." They're like, no, that's too loud. And I was like, no, trust me. You've got it. Like, this is one of those moments where you've got to trust me as a composer. Trust me, that's going to be okay, and it's going to work, and it's going to be cool. And they did, and I'm happy they did, because it worked out.
Well, probably more importantly, they're happy they did.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it proved itself. Well, so just to bring this then to the present day, obviously, to cap off a game like that, Star Wars titles, you've recently had the distinction of working with Riot on their first non-League of Legends game,
Yeah.
which is a whole other genre then of
Right.
music that's decidedly not Star Wars, although I guess you were able to sneak back semi-adjacently to the synthwave Star Wars experiment
That's right. Yeah.
you were thinking about.
Yeah, Valorant. I did all the lobby music for Valorant, the interactive lobby music system for Valorant.
Which is more of a almost like, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What genre? I just kind of put it under this broad EDM-ish bucket.
Yeah, I think I saw somebody online describe it as mid-tempo. I hate to say it, but I'm not well versed enough in that scene to even know what I wrote. I don't know what the genre is.
Just a savant.
But you know, it was like it was an interesting situation where Riot hired a EDM artist named Lick to write music for the game to give it its feel and establish its palette and whatnot. They played me his track, and it's just this killer track that's full of energy and just like it has this brutalism that's really very cool. And you listen to it and it makes you want to nod your head, and it makes you want to go get into a round of, you know, whatever it is, 5-on-5 combat or something. It's exactly what they needed to set the tone for the game. Then they asked me if I could turn Lick's track into an interactive version of his track for the menu system. And the energy of his track proved to be just too much to be able to sit there and like chill out and wait for a match and browse the store and all that stuff. It was too much in a menu system. So they asked me to write calmer stuff, basically, but stuff that would fit with the palette that he had created. So I took his snare sound and his drum sound from his track and a couple, like a synth layer from one thing, and ended up writing the rest of everything, all so that it would feel like an extension of his stuff.
Sure.
And where his track is in the game is now in character selection and all over their marketing stuff. And so my job was to make you make it feel like a like cool place to kind of unwind in between matches in the menu system. And you could unwind, and then it would like lead you into the ramp up of his track, then getting you psyched up for the match over character selection, and then it puts you into game and you're off and running.
Well, it seems to have gone really well because all the sort of ambient chat, like the game seemed to just come out of the gate. I mean, it's not a huge shock given just the profile of Riot, but the game has certainly not struggled to find an audience from my perspective. And, and there's a lot, like I come across people even just on Twitter, like not related to you. Like I just kind of randomly will come across people who are specifically calling out like those areas that you're talking about, you know, these interstitial moments between that kind of the really driving all out. And it's funny how, you know, people, they spend like 30 hours like on a given menu screen over the course of a month or whatever on a game. And so they really internalize that stuff, and they really, if they don't love it, they hate it. And so it seems like it's been quite a lot of the former.
I mean, we did something fun with the menu system. We made it interactive, which I don't think enough people do with menu systems.
Oh yeah.
But we noted that with a game like Valorant, you're going to sit in the menu system for a long time. And so there's different tabs of different things you can do, like a collection tab and a play tab and a store tab, all that sort of stuff. Latest for like news and who knows what. And so knowing that you had to stay there for a long time, I didn't want to just do a single loop that would, you know, maybe it's 2 minutes long, maybe it's 5 minutes long, whatever it is. I didn't want to do loop that would get tiresome over a half hour of sitting in the menu system.
I mean,
So
it's funny because menus tend to be the one area where a composer feels like it's like they're the closest thing that a job might have to the throwaway cues.
yeah,
It's
totally.
like the combat music is what counts, or the big
Right.
cinematics, or the boss fight, or whatever. Like menu is just that's like it's the equivalent of being on an elevator.
Yeah, exactly. But this is a competitive esports shooter, so they knew for a fact there was going to not be any music in game because
You muted it.
esports pros muted immediately. So because they want to hear the player feedback sounds. So we knew that the menu system was all there was going to be, and you were going to spend a lot of time there. And so I had this idea. This is actually why I tagged Clint and Peter earlier today on Facebook. I had this idea to do the menu system inspired by the interactive music system from Monkey Island 2 for Woodtick Island, where there's a hub theme, and every time you go into a different house on Woodtick Island, the instrumentation changes, the melody changes, and the feel changes, and then it transitions back to the main hub music when you go outside of that house into the main part of the Woodtick town. So that's how I treated the menu system.
iMuse stuff, man.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, and we didn't get remotely close to as complicated as it turns out Michael Land did on Woodtick Island. But we're using Wise, and we're changing based off of crossfades on bars, and but what I did is I wrote a bass cue that is about half the track, and then each tab is an overlay with the rest of the track, and depending on which one you're in, the arrangement is different. Like the structure is the same, but the instrumentation is different, and the melodies are different, and it's just changes depending on which tab you're in. And they transition smoothly between each other as you switch around through the tabs of Valorant's menu system.
Well, I think that's awesome, and that's the kind of detail. I mean, I had a whole long conversation recently on this podcast, entire with Olivier Derriere, who's his mission in life is these kinds of interactive music systems. Right. And I share that. I feel very similarly. To me, that's the whole point of game scoring,
right,
as opposed to film scoring. And it's so cool to hear that level of attention to detail going into something that every other game ever has treated as like the one thing we don't need to pay attention to. That's just awesome. Well, so I just have one last thing I want to ask you, because you've already been very generous with your time. I think it's midnight now. But that was a perfect segue, actually, because it was something I thought of at some point that I wanted to circle back to, because as part of your work in LucasArts, you worked on something that was one of my favorite little tricks I've ever seen in a game. Which was, as a lifelong, and I don't know your role in this, but I'm going to give you all the credit for it, and don't ruin it for me. Okay. One of my favorite, like I said, I was a big junkie for all things LucasArts, and Grim Fandango is probably my favorite game of all time, and Pete's music is just, for me,
astounding.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those, it hit me right at the exact right moment. I was finishing high school, and it was one of those like glimpses into what art can be and how people can meaningfully make it, and everything from the Tim Schafer side of it, the voice actors. It's just like, it's a perfect piece of creativity.
Yeah.
But I had been a big fanboy going all the way back to like Loom. And so when the remaster of Monkey Island, the first Monkey Island 1 comes out, and you could hit like F10 or whatever, and it transitions you back to the original, and the cue, all now nicely and beautifully produced and live instruments and sounding like $1 million, transitions like beat by beat
Yeah.
onto the original queue. I thought, I feel like I'm the only person this feature was for. I remember I played it and I just thought this shows such love and reverence for the source material.
Yeah.
And I thought, what massive pain in the ass it had to have been to implement a system that will track the old score and the new score in perfect parallel throughout the game this way, just for a nerd like me to be like, to like click it back and forth in my best Peter Griffin. It was so, I was so blown away. So can I give you credit for that?
You can give me credit for part of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, disabuse me of my fantasy then.
So
if nothing else, just hats off to you and whomever else, because that was...
me and Will Roget and the producer of the game. Wait, did Will work on that one? I know Will worked. So Will worked his ass off on Monkey Island 2, the remaster of Monkey Island 2, but I can't remember if he worked on Monkey Island 1. So basically, the remaster and all that stuff was the precious baby of LucasArts producer Craig Derrick. Craig wanted to lovingly redo the game, but at the same time make the old game available. And he wanted it to be the case that at the push of a button, you could switch back and forth between the new version and the old version. So because Craig, so Craig came to my office one day and he was like, look, here's what I want to do. I don't even know if this is possible. Not the functionality. Like, can we update the music and everything? Like, do you think that would be successful? And I don't even know if he had focused on Monkey Island yet as the one he was going to do. So he asked if it was possible, and I went away and I did a updated version of the Maniac Mansion theme with contemporary instruments. It was like a rock band. And so I showed that to Craig and he was like, cool. All right. Well, yeah, let's see what happens. And oh, by the way, we're doing Monkey Island. So I knew that our tech was going to be limited and we really only had the ability to play these two tracks in simultaneously with each other and just fade back and forth between them. So I had to make sure that the tempos were the same and the arrangements were the same and the files were like looped to the same, like sample accurate loops.
Yeah, exactly.
So you switch back and forth between them and they looped fine. And as much as I appreciate your appreciation of it, we actually fucked up and we made a mistake with it. And it kills me that we did. Because we started looking into, how did this game sound originally? And in the days before recorded audio, everybody's game sounded slightly different depending on which audio card they had.
Right.
So the Cadillac of audio cards was the Roland MT32. And then you had all kinds of different versions of the game that had everything from nice sounding polyphony down to really crappy monophonic sound. You had large sections of the game that actually have no music, which is surprising, I think, if you go back and play the original from
right.
nowadays. So I knew I wanted to fix that and cover over those patches where there was nothing. And so we decided, well, okay, so what we'll do is we'll try to emulate the MT32 version. But we had a bitch of a time trying to actually pull off making the MT32 version of the score sound the way it did, in part because we had no reference material for that. So we just did what we thought we were doing and thought it was correct. And I think Will bought an MT32 off of eBay in order to do it. And I spent hours and hours poring over floppy disks from the 90s, trying to find anything that was usable from the old days of originally making that game. I say 90s, but it's barely the 90s.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like 1990.
Yeah, 90. And like there was this thing where the studio, all the music stuff back then, all the best music stuff back in the 90s and late 80s, everybody was on Macs. And a big part of why people liked working on a Mac compared to a PC is you don't have to worry about file extensions at the end of your file names, man. Like the Mac just knows. Like the Mac would be able to tell what is a JPEG versus what is an SD2 file, and it would deal with it appropriately. The problem is that means that in like 2011 or whenever the hell it was, I was trying to remake this thing, taking a 3.5-inch floppy disk from 1990, putting it into, I had to find a floppy disk USB floppy reader, and I think I don't remember where I found it, but I eventually found one like at the bottom of a closet, plugged it in, popped the thing in, and now nothing has file extensions on it. So I'm just staring at a list of files on here, and not only is it game development, not only are they Mac files, but they're game development files. So all the file extensions could potentially be things nice and easy like SD2 files or JPEGs or whatever, but they could also very easily be proprietary software that doesn't exist anymore because it was...
Oh my God.
So it was just
like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like
exactly,
we found a corner that's like half a word, and it's
that's exactly right. I was doing my and that's the other thing. File names couldn't be longer than like 12 characters, so frequently things were abbreviated in obtuse ways that only made sense if you knew what the file naming convention meant. So I was sitting there like trying to read tea leaves, trying to decipher file names.
This is what I mean, though. Like, this is what I say. I was sure it was a pain in the ass when it's.
It was.
When I played it, I thought this can't have been easy.
I cheated, and I'll tell you what happened. So,
my heart is ready to break. Hit me.
No, I went to LucasArts, the LucasArts online fan community.
Oh my God!
And I lurked on forums. And I found where people posted MIDI files of songs.
Like takedowns?
And I just took them and used that as my basis, as the starting point. And
people basically transcribed all of the music just as a fan community over time?
Yeah. It was basically like weird reverse crowdsourcing.
Did they know what, like...
I don't think I've ever told anybody that.
Well, so then wait, you said you screwed up, or there was a...
Oh, yeah. So when the game finally came out, everybody at LucasArts is high-fiving each other like, hey, look, it was so authentic to the whole experience, and isn't it amazing? And then, and I did an interview with the mixandmojo.com, which was a LucasArts of old fan community. And I was like so excited to do that interview with them. I was like, I can't wait to have them hear all this love and care that we've put into it. And then the game comes out, and I go to their forums to read and see if they're enjoying it, and they hate it. They hate the fact that we screwed up and we didn't actually get the MT32 to sound correct to what it had actually sounded like back in the day. And I forget exactly what the issue was. But it's something like, I don't know. It's something like, like piano patches 00 and we needed it to be 01 or I forget what it was. Something crazy like that. So we had actually screwed it up. And so it doesn't actually sound like what it did back in the day. And I'm super bummed about it that we did all this work and we were trying our best. And in the end, just not knowing we just couldn't recreate it the way that we thought we were. It was a bummer to find that out.
Well, the funny thing is that now no one is ever going to hear this episode of the Game Maker's Notebook, because in solidarity with that online forum, I'm going to cancel publication of this episode, and I'm going to be informing our benefactors at the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences that I'm hereby tendering my resignation out of disgrace. Even talking to someone who would make such an oversight.
That's fair.
I think so.
I deserve that.
You bought so much goodwill with stories of, living with Paul from Liverpool, but apparently not that one. And, couch surfing with actors and hanging out with the cast of 90210 and possibly ending up in tabloids as a result. And so many things, such, dare I say, salacious details. And ruined now by the one thing I was excited to ask you about.
Aww.
Well, so for anybody who's not just heartbroken like me right now, as our final comment, I always would love to give you a chance to call out any social media, things like that, where folks can find your work. And probably in fairness, in my apologies in advance, send you hate mail over the Monkey Island debacle.
That's right. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Oogew, OOGEW, which is a hysterical inside joke to me and my friend Ben, and doesn't mean a damn thing to anybody else. But nobody ever has that as a username, so
you're not like Ogu12 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. If you're I'm going to hijack this for a moment. If you are a tabletop game fanatic and you play Dungeons and Dragons, I am currently doing a little side project where I'm writing and posting a brand new magic item every day for all of the year 2020. And I just posted number 155 today. So if you're looking for magic items for your tabletop game, you can find that on Twitter and Instagram at Dungeon Teller.
You are definitely a no joke D&D guy.
Yeah, I am.
Well, thanks, dude. This was awesome. I will get over my Monkey Island thing, and I will go back to.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it when you played it. You enjoyed it, and I mean, I tried so much to be faithful to the original stuff. Like the original score was written by Michael Land, and then after that he hired Pete and Clint, and so I actually. There's a track in the game where a bunch of skeletons are having a party on LeChuck's boat, and so right. I recorded that's right.
Oh yeah, the little like jig.
Yeah, the jig. So I brought Peter McConnell in to play violin on it. So Pete's the one playing violin on it. I did that as like a loving nod to the original scores for the point and click adventure games.
All right, 5% restoration of your street cred.
And here's the other thing. I invited Mike Land back to LucasArts for the day, and I took him up to my office, and I had him listen to the tracks, and I wanted him to know the loving attention that we were giving to it all. And I wanted to play them for him and see if he was okay with what we were doing. And Mike's a pretty chill guy. And so, I was like nervous about it and stuff, but he came in and he was like, yeah, man, it's cool. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Well, I can think of no more sort of lukewarm passion story to end this otherwise extremely passion-filled chat with. So dude, again though, thank you for doing this, and
my pleasure.
I hope everyone goes and spends untold hours in the Valorant menu and plays Mafia 3 in the Old Republic and Monkey Island.
Yeah. And other stuff soon. Yeah.
Yes, more to be announced. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.